Hello, hello. We are back and welcome to the XYZ. I am Shannon. I'm joined today by, of course, co host Mary, and we have a very special guest with us, and we are so excited to have Miss Patti Keckeisan with us.
Thank you.
Welcome. And
So,
today we
th-
are talking about a very important and very timely topic. Mary, what is that topic about?
well, today's actually Halloween. So,
Yeah.
Halloween always means what? Election day is right around the corner.
Mm.
So, we've been talking a lot in our conversations around generally what does civic engagement look like currently across the generations. Certainly top of mind with election day coming up, government shutdown impacts. For me, it's personal. I'm actually heading to DC on Monday to go advocate on behalf of a pediatric cancer research and funding.
Mm.
So I'm excited about that to be engaged
Mm.
in our civic opportunities.
Mhm.
So, with that said, we were thinking that we have thoughts about it, but we know somebody who really can tell us all the ways that we can engage civically, why it's important. And with that, I want to formally introduce our first guest to the XYZ podcast and our good friend, Patti Keckeisan. Um, Yay! So we know Patty personally. I also have had the privilege to be part of one of Patty's civic engagement courses, parent leadership training. That was a very long time ago, but Patty is passionate about civic engagement and advocacy. And with that, Patty, we'll let you introduce yourself and we'll get going.
Well, thank you. I'm really so delighted to be with you, even virtually today. Thank you for including me, for thinking of me. So my name is Patti Keckeisan, and I am a parent leader. I introduce myself that way all the time because in 1999, I took a Harvard level class on civics and democracy for families called PLTI, the Parent Leadership Training Institute. And it transformed my entire life. My career had been in corporate, starting in IT and then moving into pharmaceuticals. And then I took PLTI and I realized my true passion. There was something that happened in this experience. Parents are interviewed and selected into the process because it's a 20-week Harvard level class for families. All of the supports are put in place to enable parents and people to attend. But it is a commitment and it requires attention and it requires the work of applying your weekly learnings on a project that really matters in community. So with all that said, something happened that I could feel the generations that preceded me. I could feel
Mm.
this importance and this sense of keep going. You need to keep going. So what I say now is, so then I did change my career. I became a local director of PLTI and now work for the national arm
Mm.
that replicates it across the United States and now in Australia. And what I say now is I can't stop doing it. Like I've tried. I've tried to pull back. I can't stop doing it. Civic engagement is in my blood. I remember my parents talking about civics, even
Mhm.
growing up. Like it's a word that you don't always hear anymore, right?
No.
So it's almost like maybe parents should be adding that back into our regular conversations. Because civic engagement, it's not complicated. It's any way that people participate in shaping the world around them.
Hmm.
So let's
Voting
talk
is a
about that. So I think
yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
good point, Patty. Let's define what civic engagement is broadly.
Yeah, it is. It's any way that people participate in shaping the world around them. So it could be voting. Voting is an extremely important part of that. But it's also taking a seat at the table. It's
Mhm.
sharing your story and your voice. You know, all the conversation now in nonprofits is all about getting people with lived experience at the table because that lived experience provides a lived understanding that many of us would not know about. So for any of the programs, policies, and practices that impact people, it's those people that should have a seat at the table to shape how that happens, right? Because they know best.
Mhm.
So I think you hit on a couple of points that are relevant to kind of the overall theme of our podcast, which is
Yeah.
XYZ, three generations, one conversation. You spoke to how you grew up and heard about civic engagement, and that was probably role modeled in some ways in your
Mhm.
home,
Mhm.
whether that was going out to vote, whether that was involvement, volunteering was core to people. In all the time that you've been involved with PLTI and just your own personal commitment to civic engagement, what changes have you seen throughout the past, let's say, 20 years across
Oh
the
my gosh.
generations? And and you had referenced maybe parents today need to be talking about civics, but is that even in their nomenclature? Shannon would be able to speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, Shannon, do parents today talk about civics?
No, and I think that's part of the impetus for us wanting to do this topic.
Yeah.
However, we were weary of this topic because I think it's at least for my generation and those beneath me, there has been a conflation of civics and politics.
Yes.
And there doesn't seem to be a way to break apart those things, at least not easily. And so one of the kind of the rules we set for ourselves with this was this needed to be a civic topic that
Mhm.
had completely nonpartisan implications,
That's
because
right.
that is the only way, to frame this, because it
Mhm.
should be agnostic of
Mhm.
whatever affiliations you have. But I
Mhm.
think for my generation, and for many years now, my son's now 10, and it's never been a topic. I mean, the closest they get is to, talk about the basic frameworks of like a city government,
Mhm.
you know, but we're talking top line stuff. And
Yeah.
that's very different than the experience I had growing up, 30 years ago. We had huge units of, understanding the role of not only government, but how it works with, foundations. Like we had whole things in third grade, fourth grade. Like that doesn't exist anymore, to my knowledge.
Right.
Maybe some places, yes, but it's not a focus. And then it's not a focus in education. I think at home, because of that conflation, it's too polarized. So the topic of civic engagement becomes very quickly,
Politics.
how are you showing up as a Democrat, as a Republican, what's mommy and daddy think about XYZ topic? Those are
Mhm.
not the same thing.
Do you take your children with you to vote?
I did last year
Yeah.
for the presidential one.
Yeah.
I had them come with me and they were sort of like, whatever,
Whatever.
but it was important for them to go through the process and to see, this is what you do and the importance of it. And, I make a big deal about the stickers and like some of
Yeah.
those like very basic things,
Yeah.
but I make sure that this is something that, they take seriously.
Mhm. Mhm. And that can be the very, very start of it is
Right.
exactly in that way.
Yeah.
Because
Well, go ahead, Patty. Well, because I was going to say, I obviously took that approach. I brought my kids to vote all the
yeah.
time. Remember to go vote. So they're Gen Zers, and my younger Gen Zer is like, I don't care.
Mm.
Like,
Wow.
like pushes back. Like this is,
Yeah.
and it's framed around exactly what Shannon was saying, kind of like the
Mm.
politics, the polarization, and so that's the lens that my younger Gen Zer is viewing it through, in spite of having grown up
Right.
with very civically engaged parents who are slightly left of center, slightly right of center, so they experienced healthy
Good.
dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perspectives. Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's interesting that, as my younger Gen Z is emerging into full on adulthood, she's viewing it as, it's not something I need to do. So I'm just curious from your perspective, because you get to see it more broadly, and as you're
Yeah.
getting folks involved in PLTI and involved in it
Yeah.
for many years, like what changes are you seeing?
Oh my gosh. So PLTI started in the state of Connecticut in 1992.
Hmm.
And we've been doing it since then. So there's more than I don't know, probably 10,000 graduates just within the state of Connecticut across rural, suburban, inner city locations. When the state of Connecticut started getting phone calls saying, "What is this parent leadership stuff?" That's when NPLI came into being.
Mm.
So we have an agreement with the state of Connecticut that we advance the curriculum and the initiative outside the state. And so we're everywhere from Washington State to Maine to Miami to all over California. And
Mm.
one of the things that jumped out first when you asked Mary was we're in the Central Valley of California. we're in Los Banos, we're in Merced, we're in the locations where the people who pick our fruits and vegetables for all of us are taking PLTI, where during COVID, they were driving to school so that they could get Wi-Fi, so that they could attend class. Okay. Some of those people don't have voting privileges right now.
Right.
But let me tell you something. And this, Mary, is the first thing I thought of when you asked the question. They are talking with friends and relatives and people they know who have those rights to share their perspectives. Have you thought about this? This is why this issue matters to me and to my family. If I could blah, 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 then this would impact my family in this way. That's a big influence. Okay, when you think of hundreds of families who are doing this on a regular basis. Locally, we've had parents in the class who noticed in Danbury that a school policy had changed. The school policy for the magnet school used to be that if you had one child in, then all of the children in your family could attend that school. And then they decided to change it. And so one of our parents said, no, that's not right. I'm going in two different directions for my,
Right.
and so she changed the school policy. She also went on to run for the Board of Ed, and she won. She then served so many years that she became the chair of the Board of Education for the city of Danbury. And after that, ran for state rep and represented my district's priorities in the state house. That's a story of transformation, for sure. But we've had people sitting at boards and commissions who are sharing their lived experience stories at national levels now. So the impacts that we see are so extraordinary, and it's part of why I can't stop doing this, is because I get to work with a new community who seems interested in it and say to them, this is what's going to happen in your community. So we're evidence-based, Shannon. So it makes a difference, right? Every person who has ever taken PLTI anywhere takes a pre-survey and a post-survey. And it's goes well beyond the demographics questions that we always ask. It's what do you know now and what do you know later? And what we know is that because of completing a 20-week civics and democracy initiative, family economic success improves. People realize their sense of self and self-empowerment improves so much that they act differently in the world. And so whatever job they've had, they move up.
Yeah.
Whatever staircase is next for them, they take the staircase up. So people after PLTI, something like 70% move on to the next level of education. Think about that. By taking a class in the community, they decide now it's time for me to get my GED or my PhD, because they're all around the table together, elbow to elbow. The community of learners in the PLTI classroom must authentically reflect the community outside the classroom. So it's old and young, it's homeschoolers, it's not in school yet families, it's PhDs, it's GEDs. It's pretty spectacular. So family economic success improves, education levels improve. People are involved in community in different ways as a result of PLTI. And that's not just here in Danbury or just here in Connecticut. It's everywhere. That's why they sometimes think I'm being clairvoyant, saying this is what's going to happen in your community. No, it's because the data tells us
Yeah,
that.
you've
And
seen
the
it.
stories behind it are just so positive and empowering and hard, right? 'Cause we're making change, and change is hard.
So I have
I've heard.
couple of piggyback things on that. So how has, I guess, recruitment or awareness of the program changed over the decades, right? That crosses over generations and different attitudes. And although having been, I am a proud alum of LTI, knowing that it is very diverse backgrounds, people in the classes, which is wonderful. Could you pinpoint a common denominator that drives them there? Like what motivates somebody to make that commitment?
Right, right.
And how can we inspire others, not necessarily take a 20-week class? It'd be great if they did, but
Right.
just to show up in even the simplest of ways.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. So one of the things that came out of our first marketing experience, we did a PLTI video a million years ago when I was much younger and had different hair. And the marketing group came up with this, and this is the crux of it. PLTI helps people who care or parents who care to become parents who lead.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So parents care. The first question we ask of every parent who submits an application to PLTI everywhere is, what are your concerns for children today?
Mm-hmm.
And it typically starts with a story, right? My child is being bullied, right? Or my child is being looked over for this or that, or there's an inequity here or there. And that caring is so specific and it's so valid that they learn the skills week to week to help address that. So that one question often becomes the very topic of their community project report, which is a civic project to make a positive change in community for children and families. So it's that one concern and care that is a motivation.
Hmm.
The other thing we find is that even over the years and all the differences in technologies now, it's word of mouth that is the best motivator for bringing somebody in. And it's the best way to keep our community of learners as diverse as the community is right now. Because I might bring in somebody who looks like or comes from my background, and so will others, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So all of that helps to build these pyramids of leadership over the years.
And I like that they're bringing their concern as a parent, but it's now applying it to other families that may be facing that
It's
similar what XYZ, right? Inequity or
exactly
issue or
because
right.
we
So it's
talk
it
about
just it
everything
comes
in a
out.
weekly class.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah,
so
that's
they
great.
suddenly realize they are so validated because like, yeah, I'm going through that too. Well, let me tell you what worked for me or what didn't work for me. Right.
Mm.
And so they are able to do a really full study of a community problem and use the skills weekly from PLTI to address it. So you don't need a title or a degree to be civically engaged. You don't necessarily need PLTI to be civically engaged. One can do this. Caring and taking action is the essence of it, I would say.
So let's talk about that. What
Mhm.
does action look like?
Say that one more time, Mary.
What does action look like to be civically engaged?
Right. So what does it look like? I mean, speaking up for your children, speaking up on behalf of a neighbor, checking in on a neighbor,
Mhm.
right? How you talk about things that are happening in the world over coffee or over the afternoon snack with your kids when they come off the bus, right? I mean, if your kid comes home and says, this is something that happened at school today, is there a lesson in that, right?
Mhm.
Is that right? So what action did you take when you saw that happen? They'll tell you, right? Let me tell you because you know me so well, you're going to visualize this. So in 1999, when I took PLTI, my kids were in first and second grade. Okay, they're 33 and 34 now, for perspective. When so when Kate, I graduated in June of 1999. In September, when school started that next year, Kate, who was then in second grade, dropped her backpack in the center of the kitchen floor, got on her hip on the side, and said to me, I go to school today and I hear that somebody else's mother is the president of the PTO and it's not you. Like what's going on? Right? So when they see us talking with other parents, caring about other kids, working together on community problems, they expect something of us. And that's a really good thing, right? That's a really good thing.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So I think with the action topic, I think this is where there's a paradox that maybe my generation in particular struggles with. I think there's no failure to see the change that needs to happen in the world around us,
I'm sure.
locally, regionally, globally. But that need for change, I think, feels so overwhelming and so overwhelmingly urgent that there's like a
Paralysis.
paralysis that occurs. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And then there is, and maybe it's trickled downstream to Gen Z a lot, but there is a cynicism a little bit that
Yeah.
comes with honestly with knowledge. So I'll speak for myself. While I always take like my voting rights extremely seriously, I also am very pragmatic. And I know that not because of the way our government's structured and everything like that, and we have the electoral college and there are limitations to the actual impact of your individual vote. You know, like you could start to be very literal about how much does it really matter for
Right.
me to do this thing? And
Right.
so when then you add in all the polarization over time and all of the nonsense, I understand how Gen Z gets to a point that's like, I'm not going to waste my time.
Right.
But backwards again, like I think there's also a knowledge that people share, or at least the intuition that change starts in the home, right? And change starts locally and it starts small. So this paradox of the change we need is so big and everywhere, but the change where we need to start making change right here, it can feel like a difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah. And the entry point, right? The entry
Right.
point for all of that, that's how all this started.
Yeah.
So I'll come back forward. But before PLTI started, Elaine Zimmerman was brought in by the state of Connecticut in like 1989 to find out, and we're still having this conversation, what does Connecticut need to do it as a state so that when all children enter kindergarten, they all enter at this same ready-to-learn stage, so that school is just, right, a runway for them, right? So Elaine Zimmerman interviewed people across the state for 2 years, inner city, rural, suburban, all areas. And she did it in a way that became the very basis of PLTI. She offered these meetings at a place and a time that all people could attend and get to. She offered a family meal to start. She invited unusual stakeholders. It wasn't just the government leaders and the Board of Ed, but she invited the fire chief and the children's librarian, the school custodian, and parents. She offered on-site childcare, and what she found is that there was this universal thing that happened. And this was the late 80s. There was a pushing away of the table, there was a throwing up of the hands, and there was this slogan. She saw it as a constant refrain that said, "But who's going to listen to me? I'm just a parent."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
after 2 years of hearing this, she gathered the parents across the state and said, "What is it that you need? Because you care. What is it that you need to be leaders to make change?" And they said, "We don't know how to get in. We don't know who has the power. We feel powerless, and we don't understand how change happens." So she put together first a 10-week program. Parents said it's not long enough because everyone says 20 weeks, right? So it is a full 20 weeks of such learnings.
Hmm.
And and so then because of that, it became the very essence of PLTI. So Shannon, I think what makes a difference is knowing that there's a place to enter with others like yourselves.
Yeah.
That's what makes PLTI so intensely powerful, is because you come in caring about the issues that you care about, and someone who lives in a totally different setting with different priorities and needs also cares as deeply as you, and you get to talk about it. And having that camaraderie and having that setting where, okay, we can make mistakes. I mean, we have ground rules in PLTI that have become the ground rules of my home. That's how impressive they are, right? So we have respect for one another. We also know that we can take risks and it can be okay. We can be open, but we know we can also say, ouch, if something happens that doesn't sit well with me, and we're going to stop and we're going to address your ouch, right? We're going to encourage your perspectives and your participation, but we know that if you have to pass on something, if you're just not ready to talk about it, that's okay too.
Right.
We listen, we escuchar, we listen, we share experiences, we create a safe environment because we talk about sensitive topics. Those were what were called the ropes of PLTI back in the day. Mary, did that sound familiar?
Yep.
That's how my house operates now. Something
Yeah.
happens. Ouch, we got to stop.
Right. Time out. Yeah.
Time out. What's going on?
But Patty, the reality is, and not to burst that bubble, because I think it's great, it's just not the climate we're in. It's just
Yeah.
not the climate we're in,
Right.
or
All the
particularly younger
more.
generations, right? So, you have social media, you have Gen Xers who I think are the worst participants in that social media playground in terms of just spewing off not facts and personal
Mhm.
attacks. And I can see why young people don't want to engage in that, right? So how do we still move forward despite that, right?
Right.
Where do we find good information? If our source, we have so much information coming at us, right? So I would imagine in PLTI that your curriculum has had to shift as
Absolutely.
as news sources or media sources and all these kind of behaviors and
Uh-huh.
attitudes have changed. So maybe can you speak a little bit about
Yeah.
how you all have addressed sort of this climate that frankly isn't
Yes.
respectful?
Yes, I'm so happy to. Thank you for that. So, one of the things that the pandemic laid bare was racial inequity. It became very clear, right, during that time who was doing well, who wasn't faring well, etc. And so we actually rewrote the curriculum, Mary, with a racial equity lens.
Mm-hmm.
And so in every class where we asked about, so what does this have to do with parent leadership? Because Shannon, we might have been talking about the change process, right? And we always end the class, what does this learning have to do with parent leadership? We also ask now, what does this look like through the lens of racial equity and inequity? Who's in, who's out, who's not included in this?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was one thing that happened. We did a total rewrite of the curriculum, along with making it virtual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to pivot on a dime. We had always worked virtually, so we were able to
You're
to
ahead of
make a
it.
shift for others pretty easily. And the other thing that we say now is, this is another point. So Shannon, the other thing with PLTI is there's a children's component. So when you
Mm-hmm.
come to class weekly in person, your child is learning the same weekly lessons at his or her age level and coming home with a book and on the topic and building a family library.
So do they you go together with your
Go
child?
together. Yeah, you have dinner together, and then the children go off to CLTI, and they can't wait. They cannot
Of
wait
course.
for it to
Yeah.
start, right? So one of the questions that we are all asked to think about now is, when we hear news, is who's behind the information? What's your source? And in PLTI, we use tools like to verify information, right? Because things are biased,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Things are biased. And people don't sit around and watch the nightly news after dinner like used to happen in the 60s,
No.
So we have to work harder at it. And Mary, I think what it also does, yes, there is apathy for sure. It puts some of the responsibility on our own shoulders. It puts the responsibility on our shoulders to do differently or maybe even more.
Right.
And we have to be ready for that. And when
Yeah.
we do it in community, it just makes it easier because it's not just me.
Right. Right. So if you'll indulge me here for a moment. So I
Yeah.
think as a parent now of a first grader and a fourth grader, and we're at this precipice of like maxing out as parents on this digital age. So a topic I'm hearing a lot among parents, I just finished a fascinating book called The Anxious Generation.
Yes.
And it was a book that induced my anxiety quite severely, unfortunately, but it was so thought provoking, and it presented, I think it put words to a problem that all of us have been feeling mounting. So kind of correct me if I'm wrong. Like if I were to be part of the program
Mhm.
and this was one of my problems, right? Or my thing that I'm worried about as a parent is
Mhm.
I'm really nervous about the future for my children. How are we going to navigate their kind of coming of age into the space where mobile devices or whatever we'll have by the time they're there, how do you protect them? How do you guide them? How do you shield them if in some ways, but also give them the space to grow? And so there's all these ideas and things, I know there's a pretty movement that's catching speed, like, bringing landlines back and having like landline circles with
Yes.
friends, which I love that idea.
Yes.
Or doing like sign the no cell phone till ninth grade pact amongst
Or
parents,
flip phones, right?
flip phones, which I think I might do actually.
Yeah.
Those little things, they seem like easy steps, but even in like the book states, like you can't just be the only one to do it.
That's
And
right.
so how do you go out there without being this polarizing voice?
Right.
Or maybe that is what you have to just be okay with being. So would that be a topic that I could bring into this organization and kind of spend 20 weeks like sussing out? Would
Yeah,
that be something?
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So week 4 of PLTI is about problem analysis.
Okay.
It's an actual thinking process. So people take that idea, that concern for children that they had at that first interview,
Right.
right? And now they've heard about how change happens.
Mhm.
They've studied the change process.
Mhm.
They've debated both sides of heated issue up
Okay.
until that time. So each week builds upon the next,
Yep.
right? And then we start to talk about communication. And
Mhm.
so people actually leave class saying, I can't wait for next week because that's the topic that's going to give me my next step in my project work.
Right. Right.
And so it becomes there's the curriculum that guides us along with skills and experiences, but also at every location there's hundreds of community projects that have come before you. Some of
Yeah.
them might be
Right.
on that very topic. So
Right.
it could
Right.
be that Shannon gets to take it deeper and broader
Right.
because you've learned from that parent's experience as well as your own lived experience to make
Right.
change happen. And
Interesting.
then beyond that, I mean, Bridgeport, Norwalk, Stamford, Waterbury, those are the other close locations where parents are reaching out to one another now and
Mhm.
saying, let's work on this together. Let's take a
Right.
regional approach.
Yeah.
Then there's graduates who serve as mentors who say to you, I will come to dinner with you every week so we can talk about your project work.
I love that.
So the supports are in place
Yeah.
to really enable the success of parents.
Yeah.
There's the intentionality of coming together because you care about something for children that you want to change
Mhm.
is an incredibly motivating factor that keeps people together,
Yeah, for sure.
which is
And
why
I
I
think
can't
that
stop doing this.
Yeah.
and I think that that's just a really great note to reflect on a takeaway. The power
Mm.
of people coming together about something they care about,
Yeah.
That's civics,
whatever it is, right?
Yep.
whatever it is.
Yeah,
Right.
whatever it is. So, we talked about big things like community change project and, curriculum and classes and which are all great things. But for some folks that may not be comfortable. So I think
Mm.
I'd like to bring it back down a little bit to
Hmm.
maybe some of the projects or some of the simple steps that
Hmm.
kind of you've seen people take in just their day-to-day
Hmm.
world that is civic engagement that they may not think that they're being civically
Right.
engaged.
Right.
One. And two, I think for some folks, they don't recognize that they could be an advocate. So let's talk about a little bit what does it mean to be an advocate? Because that sounds like a scary word. That sounds like I need to have
Mhm.
access to politicians
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
processes that I may not know about. And along those lines, let's talk about how our legislators actually welcome hearing
Mm.
from us, whether we view ourselves formally as advocates or just a regular guy doing the day-to-day thing just to
Right.
make the world a little bit of a better place.
Right.
Mhm.
So there's a woman I'm thinking about in a Danbury class from so many years ago, and she was uncomfortable. She was uncomfortable using her voice because she was an immigrant
Mhm.
and she just wasn't sure about her place and where she. So she said one of the things she learned in PLTI was the value of the silent observer. So Shannon, when people break into
Mm.
small groups in
Mhm.
PLTI work, they know immediately that someone has to volunteer to be a facilitator, a note taker, a timekeeper, and
Yeah.
someone is an observer.
Yeah.
He said, I'm going to use my silent observer skills, and I'm doing it because I'm scared, right?
Yeah.
I'm afraid, but that's what I'm going to do. And
Perfect.
so her thing was she went to Common Council meetings in
Oh,
the city of
interesting.
Danbury.
Yeah.
And luckily they were on different nights. Classes
Right.
were on Thursday nights. The other meetings were on Tuesday nights. And she said, I'm just going to write up my experience. And so she wrote up her experience. And a couple of years later, I ran into her in the grocery store and she said, guess what happened after that? And I said, what? And she said, I got my college degree. if I could do 20 weeks, I realized I could do college. And I realized that I don't always have to be the one who speaks up. I
No.
can be the observer in the room and still be a participant,
Mm.
right? In a way that met my needs, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that's again, you don't need a title to be an advocate.
I think that's a really powerful example because I think there is a little bit of a mythology around that, around to be a civic participant, to be an advocate, to be engaged, is to be vocal,
Right.
is to have a crystallized, high articulated stance on something.
Right.
When in reality, almost no one has those things.
Public speaking is the
No.
most frightening thing in the world.
I mean, and the risk, especially now, to Mary's point,
Especially now.
the world we live in is not a respectful one.
That's right.
And even for those who are motivated and informed, the risk is high. The social risk is high to simply because you have an opinion to then put yourself out on the line. And so I think it is a helpful reminder that there's extreme power in that role of observer
Mhm.
and just of silent participant, because it's not something that can be dismissed.
And
And I
sometimes
think
it's
the
not
theme that weaves through the stories you told were those people were cured. They remained curious,
Yeah.
right? And
oh, that's so good, Mary.
their curiosity got them to the next thing
Right.
that maybe
Right.
wasn't clear in front of them, right?
That's
I just,
no.
Well, Patty, we want to thank you so much
yes.
for
Thank
indulging
you.
us in this conversation that I
This
think
was
is
the
so
fastest
timely and
hour
important.
ever.
I know.
I know. We could keep going. And maybe we'll have part 2. That would be
I
super
know.
fun. So
And I would
thank
love to
you.
connect you even with the Connecticut people, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm really representing national, but what's happening even within our state is pretty extraordinary.
So before
Sure.
you go though, to that point, how would someone, if they're keen to learn more about, let's start Connecticut, like where do they go? Where should they go? What should they look
Right.
for?
Right. So the best place to go is the state's website. It's now called the Connecticut Commission on Women, Children's, Seniors, Equity, and
Oh,
Opportunity,
mhm.
right? We used to have all these separate legislative commissions. They've
Yeah.
all been merged into one
Okay.
state.
Okay.
And then to learn more about the work that NPLI does outside the state of Connecticut, our website is called parentswholead.org
Nice
because
and easy. I love
PLTI
that.
helps parents who care become parents who lead.
And
Perfect.
so maybe we could drop links in our
Yes, we will.
comments when we post so if people are so
Yeah.
inclined. Well, thank you. And
Thank you.
this has been very inspiring. I know that I'm looking forward to go advocate on the Hill next week in Washington.
Go,
Mhm.
Mary.
I've already early voted because I will be
Me
out.
too.
So I think that that's a new access,
It is.
relatively new
Absolutely.
change, right? So
Yeah.
everyone can
Positive one.
easily has that access now to get out and vote. And
Mhm.
so, as we kind of wrap up, I just encourage everybody to think about ways big and small that we can engage civically. I know here with the government shutdown, we have SNAP benefits coming to a close tomorrow. You
Mhm.
may want to do something as simple as consider donating to your local food bank or spending some time volunteering, as we know that those types of organizations are ready for an influx. That's an easy way to easily civically engage.
Mhm.
And yeah,
I love
let's
it.
let's think about those ropes rules of PLTI as we get out there and
Yeah.
advocate for the causes we care about.
Yep. Sounds
Thank you
great.
too so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.